Sekeres Price from Wall Center, and today's Bulldog poll question asking you, do you want the Canucks to re-sign Luke Schenn this summer? Yes or no? You can vote at Sekeres Price on Twitter. Bulldog, your source for casino games, poker strategy, and sports odds. Bulldog line of the day from me, Dallas at home, laying in wait for Seattle. Emotional letdown and some travel. I'm going to go with the Stars in game one at minus 165 on your Bulldog line of the day. Here's Jeff Paterson, our Canucks reporter, one half of the rink-wide duo with Andrew Watt. Hell of a weekend in hockey. Jeff, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Still trying to process and digest it all, but pretty incredible stuff.
So let's go back then to what we asked Friday on the Bulldog poll question. Something that was, needless to say, a big part of the conversation yesterday on social media. Do you believe in just get in and anything can happen? And particularly in light of what we saw yesterday with the two upsets in Game 7. Where are you on that question, Jeff?
I guess I look at the Winnipeg Jets and how did that work for them? No, I mean, the goal is still to build the best team possible and take your chances. And obviously a colossal collapse by the Boston Bruins and something we're going to be talking about and hockey historians will be studying for years. But it doesn't take away from what the Bruins accomplished in the regular season. But, the plot changes when you get to the playoffs. And one of the things that I haven't heard talked about, I don't think enough, is matchups. And that's what playoffs are all about. Like, Florida went 2-2 against Boston in the regular season. There was every reason to believe that Florida could and would give Boston a better fight than I think a lot of people imagined, just based on the record and the 43 points in the standings that were between these two teams. But the Panthers had a 120-point season a year ago. They added one of the best young players in the National Hockey League. They got healthy at the right time. And they got some goaltending that they didn't have through much of the season for various reasons. So, on the surface, sure, it had mismatch written all over it. I was all in. I had Bruins in my hockey pool, and I figured that they would win the Stanley Cup. Upsets happen. That's what we love about sports, but you don't build a team hoping for an upset. That would be flawed logic for any manager. So it's still about building the best team you can, giving yourself the best opportunity, and ultimately, the Florida Panthers may flame out in the next round, and then, sure, they can, live off the idea that they knocked off the Boston Bruins, but unless they win the Stanley Cup, just getting in as a wild card, ultimately, what does that mean?
Well, it's funny because we talked about how the Eastern matchups were so delicious, particularly with the President's Trophy team winning the last two President's Trophy teams facing each other. Of course, Florida changed the makeup of their team so immensely with that Matthew Tkachuk trade. And give Bill Zito and the management team credit there a little bit. That takes some stones to perform surgery as deep as they perform surgery on guys like Huberdeau and Weegar and make the deal for Matthew Tkachuk. I don't think there would have been a lot of GMs, Jeff, that would have done that. They would have looked at it and said, hey, we're a President's Trophy team. We'll do better in the second round next year. Let's run it back. No, went quite the opposite way. Changed the absolute top of the roster.
Right, but I think they recognize that Jonathan Huberdeau, until he proves otherwise, not necessarily a playoff performer, right? 115 points in the regular season, but when the chips are down, he hasn't shown himself to be a playoff guy. Matthew Tkachuk brought an awful lot of what the Florida Panthers were missing. I mean, they scored in bunches last year on their way to the President's Trophy, but, they lacked some of that playoff edge that Matthew Tkachuk is full of. And so when they saw that he was available, I think that was the trade that they recognized they had to make. Now, to part with a guy like Weegar as well, on the surface, you thought, my goodness, those are two awfully big pieces for the Florida Panthers to be moving out. But look at their playoff roster right now. Gustav Forsling, averaging over 25 minutes a game. Canuck fans don't want to hear that. I know that water is well under that bridge, but this guy has arrived as a legitimate top pair National Hockey League defender. So the Canucks scouting staff wasn't wrong when they selected him. They just moved off him way too soon. But Gustav Forsling leads the Panthers in ice time, and Brandon Montour was all world in that series against the Boston Bruins at both ends of the ice. So it takes me until number 3 on their depth chart to get to Aaron Ekblad, a first overall pick, seen as a stud in the eyes of most, maybe not Brooks Koepka, but in the eyes of most. There's 3 pillars on your back end, and Ekblad is a second pairing guy. So, I think they learned a lot from last year where they went all out offense. They won the President's Trophy, But it comes down to finding a way to grind out tough wins in the playoffs, and they didn't do a very good job of that last season. I think they learned from some of those mistakes. They addressed them through trade, and I think they're better off for the experience of a year ago where they had all the regular season success, but really none in the playoffs. And who knows how far. I mean, they're up against it again, but coming in with a world of confidence, obviously, and showing what is possible with that win over the Boston Bruins.
The home ice thing looked like it was just a novel stat over the first few nights of the playoffs. It lasted for the entirety of the first round and through these game sevens as well. Any theories? Like, the luxurious plane rides have always been there. The luxurious visitors' dressing rooms, which certainly weren't there 30 years ago, but they've been there for the last 15 years. Any theories? What's happened here this 1 year?
Yeah, that is a mystery. Not a single team protected home ice in the opening round. It's nuts. And Florida, Boston lost 7 games at home all regular season and lost 3 in a row to the Florida Panthers here to wrap up that series. The Kraken were an incredible road team. One of the reasons the Kraken finished where they did above the playoff bar was their road record this year. They were okay at Climate Pledge, but they were really good. Remember midseason, they went out and they had that 7-game road trip and they swept it, and it was the first time in hockey history, the Kraken of all teams were the first team in hockey history to run the table on a 7-game road trip. So the road isn't an obstacle for them, but going to Denver at altitude and rattling off 3 of 4 there as well against the. So, yeah, I mean, a total mystery. I guess my theory is that, 16 teams make the playoffs, 16 don't. The 16 that do are all really good teams. Like, even if you're a 95-point team, you're still an above-average team in the National Hockey League, and clearly you've had to win some games out on the road during the regular season. They're sort of battle-tested. As you said, home ice isn't what it once was in terms of the arena and the screaming fans and the amenities, and so I think teams now, they're just kind of more focused, and I think you recognize, too, certainly if you're the lower seed, you have to get one on the road. If you're the higher seed, I think you have to be prepared, though, to get at least one on the road, just because it seems all these lower seeds come in and get the job done. And I've always thought, if you're the lower seed and you're starting on the road, get the first one. Get the first one, and right there you wrestle away home ice advantage. And we saw that this year as well, where a bunch of teams, delivered a pretty good punch on the opening night of the playoffs.
Although Winnipeg couldn't make good on that.
You're right.
They see their season come to an end. But hey, execution on a couple of fronts for a couple of big teams. The Canadian teams are through in Edmonton and Toronto, and we got to see what that looks like, which is a big fan fest. And that storyline's over. I saw a lot of RIP, the longest running joke in NHL history. We've got to put this one to bed. They've done it, Jeff.
Yeah, and long overdue, obviously. They've made the playoffs every year that Austin Matthews has been a Toronto Maple Leaf, and this is his first chance to play in the second round. But you think of what he's done early in his career and the way that they've surrounded him, and they gave themselves every opportunity and just kind of flushed them in the past. But yeah, they got this one right. Credit to them. Took a little overtime on Saturday night, but I'm sure they think now that the path is clearer, not having to run through Boston. Again, you're facing a Florida team that's going to be full of confidence and one that can score goals and not afraid to play overtime hockey out on the road as well. So we'll see if that is, in fact, a break for the Leafs. And for the Edmonton Oilers, good on them. McDavid and Draisaitl obviously did their thing. McDavid was a little slow to arrive at the party. There was some talk about whether he was 100%. But once they got rolling, they were their power play, 9 for 15. We talk about the Canucks penalty kill and why special teams matter. They always went, they had historically best power play in the NHL history, and that carried over into that series, and it went to 60% in the opening round. But I know the people in Edmonton are excited about the depth scoring that arrived in that series, and a guy like Klim Kostin, nobody talks about, but it seemed to me that he's doing a lot of the things that Jesse Puljujärvi was expected to do all those years. Big body, play in traffic, bring a little bit of edge to his game, but also provide some scoring. And he did that the other night. And, they got some saves aside from the whiffed broken stick by Stuart Skinner. That was pretty bizarre. But ultimately, the Oilers are through, and they look pretty good. And what a series now against Vegas. And it kind of feels, guys, like the hockey world is sleeping on the Dallas Stars a little bit as well. And we'll see what the Kraken can do going down to Big D. But Dallas has the best goaltender in these playoffs, at least so far. And they've got depth, and they got a well-rounded lineup. So we'll see how it goes for the Dallas Stars. But I would say don't sleep on those Stars. I think they've got a lot of component parts there to go deep into these playoffs.
I'm with you there, Jeff. Kind of like a few years ago when they made the Cup final with Rick Bowness on the bench, and people were sleeping on them right up until they won the West. Excuse me.
All right.
How should the Canucks feel about their would-be geographic rival down the road making the second round of the playoffs? How should Canucks fans feel about the Kraken advancing to the second round in their first playoff go, beating the defending Stanley Cup champions in Game 7 on the road, en route?
Yeah, I mean, I guess they should be used to it. Vegas laid the groundwork in its inaugural season. This took 2 years for the Seattle Kraken. Look, all the reasons out there about starting from scratch and not having bloated contracts and having cap space to go and claim a guy like Oliver Bjorkstrand last year when Columbus was in peril, and then you see Bjorkstrand last night become the 15th different Kraken scorer to score. You know, is there some jealousy? Sure. Is there some frustration? I imagine that there is in the fan base. If you're the Vancouver Canucks, though, I think you better be watching and observing pretty closely about the way the Kraken are constructed with this big, strong, beefy defense core and just this incredible depth up front. And let's give them props, too. Like, I see a lot of people saying, oh, the Avs didn't have Landeskog, and then Nikushkin left the series, and Kadri wasn't there. Yeah, all true. The Kraken got through. Jared McCann left the series. 40-goal Jared McCann left the series. And Andrei Burakovsky hasn't played since February of some time. Like, the Kraken are missing 2 of their best offensive players and still had 15 different guys go and score. Their forecheck was relentless. The way they locked it down once they got to about the 10-minute mark of that third period last night. Like, the Kraken, you know, you knew that Colorado was going to have a last-ditch push, and McKinnon was trying, but other than that, I mean, depth really won them that series because McKinnon and Rantanen both had decent numbers at the end of the 7 games, but I mean, Colorado got nothing, like literally nothing from its bottom 6, and the Kraken was the mirror opposite of that, and depth served them well and really carried the day for the Seattle Kraken. So I love the fact that they've got a guy like Daniel Sprong on the fourth line who's playing at league minimum and turned a PTO into a contract, and he scored 20 goals. And you go up and down that lineup, the 6 20-goal scorers that they had this year, you know, that's going to be the question. Can Dallas withstand, you know, the depth scoring of the Seattle Kraken? Because Dallas has better top-end talent with Rupe Hintz and Jason Robertson, but that doesn't seem to phase the Seattle Kraken, who just dethroned the defending champs. And, you know, they're going to have to stick to their game plan and do it again here against Dallas and find a way, obviously, to get past Jake Ottinger. But give the Kraken credit. I like their speed. I like the tenacity and how relentless they are on the forecheck. They hound pucks. They turn them over. And then they've got enough offense on every line that, you know, you put a puck in a scoring position, you got guys that can finish there. So that's been their blueprint. That's their identity. And again, at this time last year, I wasn't sure Dave Haxtell was going to get a second year behind the bench with the Kraken, and here he is doing things that I mean, the voting's done, but you know, it should probably get some Coach of the Year votes, and I imagine he will. Yeah. You know, Jim Montgomery, that'll be no consolation prize for him if he's the Coach of the Year. But I would hope that Dave Haxtell gets a little bit of recognition around the league.
Well, here's the thing about with that Boston loss. There are going to be some long faces on awards night. Montgomery, Coach of the Year, Ullmark with the Vezina. I suspect Bergeron may win the Selke, and you're going to have some guys.
Was that a goodbye for Bergeron?
Well,
right?
We saw the same thing last year, too, of course. But, yeah, I think you're going to see some awfully long faces. It's going to be no fun at
Jeff,
the award.
The Pacific Division is interesting now with some success here for a couple of teams like Vegas and Seattle. Some wound licking for a team like the LA Kings, who look like they're ready to stick around here and be contenders for a couple of years. And then, of course, Edmonton trying to make good and get all the way this time. But then you've got Calgary making the big changes today as well. There's been rumors and reports of ownership problems there, but they got the arena. They get rid of the coach and GM. There's some tumult there. It's going to be an interesting year next year when we see how it all shakes out here in the Pacific.
Yeah, and we are 1 week away from perhaps a seismic shift in the division with the draft lottery. And when the ping pong balls land next Monday, pretty good chance. Anaheim's got the best odds. San Jose is in that mix as well. And Connor Bedard could be setting up shop on the West Coast. And, you know, that just changes the car. Like, Anaheim's so deep in its depth pool and its prospects that if you had Connor Bedard, like, how quickly can the Ducks take flight? LA still has a bunch of guys in reserve, and can I just say, and I tweeted this out on Saturday when they were eliminated, but probably the end of the line for Alex Edler, right? 37-year-old Alex Edler out of contract, and I don't know what he wants at this stage, and I'm not sure how many opportunities he would have, but he didn't dress for the final 2 games because I just think that the Kings thought Oilers' speed was a little too much for him. If it's the end of the line, what an incredible run, and we've had this discussion. He'll have his spot in the Ring of Honor here in Vancouver at some point. But my point is that, the Kings will move off Alex Edler, but they'll probably insert a guy like Brant Clark next year. Like, they've got depth for days in their system. So, don't feel bad for the LA Kings. Yes, they wanted to go further in these playoffs, but they ran into McDavid and Draisaitl. But yeah, I mean, the Kings, I think, are just kind of entering their competitive window, much like the New Jersey Devils. The Ottawa Senators are a little bit behind them. A team like Detroit is looking like it's trending in the right direction, and it's going to add another piece or a couple of pieces in the first round this year. And that's the trouble for the Vancouver Canucks is, you're trying to build the best team you can in a vacuum. You can't control what's going on around you. But I saw a website today, it was at hockeyprospects.com, that had the Canucks system ranked 28th of the 32 NHL teams. And that shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, but it just underscores that there are teams that are ahead of the Canucks in their competitive curve, and they've got way more in their system and in their pipeline. And, in theory, that's just going to advance those teams as they move here. So that's the trouble for the Vancouver Canucks, up against it with the cap, not much in the system. And yes, you've got some foundational pieces, but can you support them? Can you find those players, Paterson, Hughes, Miller, Thatcher Demko, can you find a better supporting cast? Because ultimately, you saw a top-heavy Colorado team couldn't get it done this year. A team that spread its scoring depth around in Seattle, still alive, moving on to the second round.
Speaking of players to add, we'll ask you the Bulldog poll question here. I know you don't hope, Jeff, but on the Luke Schenn front, he made an impact on that Toronto-Tampa series. Did you see something that makes you think, boy, they ought to bring him back more so than before the start of the series?
No, full stop right there. Been there and done that. They weren't good enough with Luke Schenn the first time around, or the second time around, for that matter. Third time, I don't think is the charm. He will be 34 in November. I have nothing but respect for Luke Schenn, and I know I'm not alone in that regard, whether it's fans, media, teammates, and even opponents. This guy is just a true pro through and through, and to think that it looked like his career was over at his end of the time in Anaheim, and what a second or third chapter and act there's been in Luke Schenn's career, and now into the second round, and we'll see where it goes. And so, look, he was good in the role that he played for the Canucks, but this is about the Canucks moving on from the past. It goes back to what I just said a second ago. The New Jersey Devils are adding Luke Hughes. The Vancouver Canucks are going to add Luke Schenn again? Come on. Let's be serious here. Do they need elements of what he has, toughness and some intimidation? Yeah, 1,000%. But, he's going to be a free agent. Is he going to be able to command a little bit of term here? Again, 34 in November. It is time to turn the page and go and find players that can help you, that can be part of this window, this age group that Jim Rutherford has talked about repeatedly. And that's not to say that you can't have veterans in your locker room, but I just think the idea of going back to that well yet again is misguided for the Vancouver Canucks. They need help, but I don't think Luke Schenn is the guy.
Couple more here from me, Jeff. Jonathan Lekkerimäki's season ends with Djurgården. They do not get promotion to the top division of Swedish hockey. Blake and I were just kicking around in hashtags. He thinks a loan is going to be possible there to play against the best players in Swedish hockey. But is there any part of you that would bring him over for Abbotsford after a strong playoffs?
I would say no. He seems like he's on the record as wanting to stay there, and generally, if a guy wants to stay over in Sweden for another year, I'm for it. But I'm with you. If you can find him a way to play in the SHL against the best players over there, I think that would really help his development. He'll turn 19 here in July. So all of next season, he's still a teenager. And I think we have to remember that if he spends his 19-year-old season playing against pros in the best league in Sweden, that would help his development, and then he can come over here, and we'll see where it goes at that point. But, he'll arrive on North American soil in theory as a 20-year-old. So there's still time to develop him and work with him, and I'm sure the Canucks with their development staff and Michael Samuelsson over there they'll find the best place for him. Look, he had a nice redemption to what looked like a lost season. So give him credit, whether it was the injury, whether it was mono, playing last summer. It just seemed like an awful lot. Got off to such a slow start. And I know people here in this market jump on anybody that, doesn't pan out immediately the way that people want them to. But it is a marathon, not a sprint. And for him to have, 15 points in 15 playoff games, again, I think that gives you an indication that this guy's got the skill and the talent that made him a mid-first-round pick last year. But I wouldn't be in any rush to bring him here. I'd give him that one more year, the comforts of home, at least in his homeland, before he makes his way to North America.
Lastly, Jeff, it's a pressure spot. Many have buckled, thinking Anthony Fauci, Dr. Anthony Fauci, 50 Cent, Mission's Carly Rae Jepsen.
What's the category?
Throwing out the first pitch at a baseball game with cameras rolling, Jeff.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell us about your experience Friday.
Yeah, well, look, my good fortune, I suppose, was your misfortune, because you guys were the starters on Friday, but got a little delayed in your arrival at the ballpark. And as I've done throughout my career in the bullpen for you, there I was, literally this time, got tapped with about 10 minutes notice. Look, I played baseball my entire life growing up, but I haven't thrown a baseball. I coached my kids' team a few years ago before the pandemic. Was probably the last time that I actually thrown a baseball. So it sounds great. Yeah, what an opportunity. This will be fun. And then you cross through the fence door out onto the actual field and the playing surface. And then it gets real. And you're right, in this day and age of all the viral videos that have gone wrong, that's all that was 50 Cent's throw was on a loop in my head, and I didn't want any part of that. Now, I got a good break in this one because young Brooks, it was his birthday at the ballpark, and part of the celebration, he had a whole bunch of friends, and they let him. There were two of us that threw out first pitches on Friday. And so I would say Brooks looked like he was 11 or 12. He went first, and he airmailed the catcher, and he was all amped up. He had his glove, he's full wind up, and it hit the backstop. And so at that point, the bar was remarkably low for me, right? The kid missed the mark entirely. How could I do any worse? I couldn't really. So I'll admit there was a bit of a lob, but I got it. It went about as well as I could have hoped and sort of played out in my mind. No dirt involved, no viral video. Just got it to the catcher and play ball. So, yeah, no, it's fun. It was good. But you're right. The idea of, I'm just going to lob a pitch to the guy at the backstop, no big deal. But then you realize that there's a couple of thousand people here.
Yes.
And, yeah, so.
Cameras are rolling.
Yeah.
Sadly, I've been there in that spot having to sing, Jeff. Okay?
Right.
I see your first pitch and I raise you.
Yeah.
And okay, Blue Jay. You did marvelously, and every time I passed you Friday during our company event, and what a great time we had, thanks to Andy down in the Canadians. You were regaling with the story of what it's like being up there.
And they let me keep the ball. So I've got the ball here in my home office now. It's a nice souvenir of a terrific day at the ballpark on Friday.
Brilliant stuff. Thanks, Jeff. Catch up next week.